meeting to order. Joanne, would you read the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mayor Jackson,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Bowen,
Here.
Ms. Cordova. Here. Mr. Lopez,
Here.
Mr. Lucero,
Here.
Ms. Parker. Here. Mr. Robinson,
Here.
Mr. Heflin.
Here.
We are all here.
All here. Good. I'm glad everybody's here. If everybody would stand, Mr. Robinson will lead us in the invocation, then I'll lead us in the pledges. Oscar?
Thank you, Mayor. Father in heaven, we come to you again tonight to ask you to continue to place your hands over our community. Continue to be with our kids as they progress through the school system. Help our workers as they continue to provide service for our community. We ask you to watch over the mayor and pray with his family and let all our prayers be with him. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen. You'll mean the pledge, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The flag of the state of New Mexico is the symbol of perfect country among the American cultures.
job, everybody. Loud and proud. I like it. Next item is scheduled business action and discussion items. Item A is minutes of the previous meeting that was held October 4th, 2022 in these chambers. Those minutes are in your packet. I hope everybody's had a chance to look at them. If you have, I would entertain action to approve those minutes, please.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lucero, second by Ms. Parker. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Next item is the employee of the month for October. Miss Austin,
Actually be Miss Kelly because it's in her department.
Miss Kelly. Okay, Miss Kathy Wood.
It's a very tough job. They're always dealing with the public on a negative aspect. You don't have to deal with code enforcement, you are doing something right. She's always on track, she does her job day in and day out with little to no supervision. The supervisor knows that he doesn't have to worry about her, that she is out in the public doing her job. She doesn't get great reviews again, she is making the public follow the ordinance. She doesn't shy away from angry patrons, she listens to them and she doesn't try to work with them. She has been described as very hard, but also very exciting. The main thing that keeps her out is they right into public works, even when we were trying to find an office for her and change the schedule. She just said, okay, I will be out driving the street, you let me know where to come back to. She works closely with DMV and has formed working relationships with all of public works departments. Kathy grew up here, she knows a lot of people, she does not let that affect how or when she does her job. She tells them, I am Kathy, code enforcement officer right now, not Kathy, your friend. Kathy has since moved into the new community service department and is working very well with Kathy. Thank you for all that.
All right. Bring your prepared speech.
No.
Hey, your job is one of the stuff, is one of the tough stuff. Thank you, for sure. And the rest of them, we're really proud. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate it. That's all right. I'm out of here. I'm getting beat over at 16. All right. Item C is items from the Finance Administration and Committee and Finance Director Marilyn Rapp. First item is ratification of the Finance Department's actions on bills and expense report for the month of September 2022. Marilyn, thanks for being here. Where are you at?
I ran over here.
What happened to our other podium?
We had expanded our staff.
All right.
We just like to change things up.
Okay, good job. Carry on. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I come before you once again for ratification for the monthly bills, and this is for the month of September. In September, when you see this amount, you might go, oh, that's a lot. It's $2,366,466.57. We did have some large expenditures in the month of September. 344,529.19 for Kilgore improvements. 257,506.95 for roof repairs. We did purchase two 2022 Ram 1500 pickup trucks for 63,286 and 50,000 for the RCC DC annual contract. And that came out of Fund 709 Economic Development. And these are all within budgeted limits. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I await your pleasure.
Any questions for Marilyn or any of our representatives from the Finance Committee? Entertain action on the department bills, please.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Parker to approve, a second by Mr. Heffernan. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Second item is resolution 22-23-22, approval of 110th fiscal year first quarter budget adjustments for fiscal year 2022 through 2023. Marilyn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The Finance Committee did meet last Thursday and review these budget adjustments, and they did recommend approval for the council. I will go over them very quickly. If you have any questions, please stop me. And most of these items are items that we weren't aware of or just at the end of the last fiscal year, or we're moving them around a little bit just because some of the way we spend things have changed. In the general fund, we got a thermal camera donation that came to the council a few weeks back. And so I have to post the revenue and expense for that. The Fiesta de Familias event got a grant. And so I have to post the revenue and revenue for that also. And transferring $23,708 of the cannabis excise revenue tax from the cannabis fund into the general fund. The state requires that we keep that in a separate fund and transfer it out to spend it. For the year, you'll see this later on, I'm estimating about 66,000 total. I'm just moving out what we needed for this quarter. So we still have that in reserve, the additional. So far to date, we've gotten about 15,000. And so then and those are the revenues and the transfers in. For the expenses in the general fund, you can see the grant for the Familias. We spent some money on the mental health feasibility study. We had some appraisals, some licenses. I was moving some expenses, but you know, the general fund is balanced, that the increase in revenues matches the increase in expenditures. For the fire protection fund, we had a $20,000 stretcher grant, the trauma systems development grant. And our total cost for the stretcher is like $20,892. So I had to move $892 from non-capital into that equipment grant to pay for the stretcher. And in the street fund, we're transferring in $210,000. And this is coming from the American Rescue Act money. And so this is for a water tanker truck and a skid steer. And the skid steer is most commonly known as or usually known as a Bobcat, or that's how, you know, we always talked about it. And so we have that revenue and expense. In the recreation fund, even though we have transferred most of our expenses over to or most of the programs over to the schools, we had some expenses. We had we had the contract for the schools for recreation. I had 8,000 and we ended up paying 10. So I increased that by 2,000 and 2,500 for helmet recertification. Football helmets have to go back every few years to be recertified, just to make sure that they're safe for the students to wear. And so we have an increase in that fund and expenditures. And so that will come out of our fund balance, but we have, you know, plenty of fund balance to cover that for right now. On the next page, we have the American Rescue Act. And you can see the 210,000 going out for the water truck and the skid steer, and 218,884 being transferred. And you'll see that further down for the mechanics warehouse renovation. And that's going to the building fund. For the cannabis regulation, I put the 65 instead of 66,000 for the tax revenue and in the transfer out. In the 301, this is the capital repair and replacement. We got a $85,000 reimbursement for a backhoe. We got that backhoe at the end of the fiscal year and it's on a reimbursement. And so I budgeted the reimbursement last year. I just pulling it over into this year. And then we had 19,948 for voice over IP equipment that I needed to budget in that. But there's still more coming into the fund than going out with those. The building improvements, you see the money coming in for the mechanic shop. And then there's a lot of movement in here. It's a net increase in expenditures of 612,384. And so there's a lot of that is for the roofing. When we get into the roofs, we find some air conditioners that need to be replaced. A big one is the air conditioners at the library. There's 91,000 for that, but there were 11 of those, I do believe.
7.
Seven.
Seven. Okay, I was exaggerating. 7 of those, and they run about 13,000 a piece to replace those. They were of such an age that they couldn't be repaired. So if you have any questions about those, I'd be happy to answer those, but getting to the last one is water fund. And so the 2 crew trucks, which I mentioned, the 63,286, that was a rollover from last year. We had ordered 4, we received 2 by the end of the fiscal year. These 2 did not come in until this year, so that's why I needed to increase that budget. And then $15,000 for architecture services, and that's related to some roof projects. And so that's a decrease to the fund balance, but we still have at this point quite a bit left in our fund balance. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those, or I'm sure anyone from who was on the finance committee could also help with answering those.
One of the things that catches my attention, Marilyn, is the water tanker for $210,000.
It's the water tanker and the skid steer, and the skid steer is about 65,000.
Have we,
Use of that water tank. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Mayor,
Go
have
ahead.
we ordered the water tanker?
Yes, you guys approved it a couple council meetings ago.
It's been a little bit ago. Yes, it has been ordered.
This is coming out of the ARPA fund, the SRF funds. I keep changing the name of it, but the American
Yeah.
Recovery Funds.
Oh, we have the funds from there. And it's for our street department.
Yes,
Yes.
Because we water a lot of streets, right?
well,
They use that for their construction.
yes.
So
I want
Have one? Do we have an old one?
Kind of want to laugh.
Yeah, 1969.
1969 model.
Having a little trouble getting parts for that.
Imagine.
Marilyn, is that,
Well, and the only reason I'm bringing it up and thinking about it and thinking, you know, and being a little bit facetious about it or whatever, you know, I mean, we're looking at spending that much money on a water tanker truck for a non-existent street department. And we're concerned about that. Steve, you're doing a wonderful job, but you know, I couldn't be prouder of the work you're doing, you know, with the pothole repairs and trying to keep up with that. But we've got to get to a point where we have a working street department to do repairs. We can't just keep patching. You know, I mean, like I said, you're doing the top-notch job patching, but we've got to get a plan in place to do some street replacements.
Mr. Mayor, to that point, I mean, you know, we used to have an oil distributor, we used to have a chip spreader. And we had a regular maintenance plan that we went around and we chip sealed these streets that we had these issues on. Hopefully that's where we're getting back to. And that, you know, and then we'd get those MAP funds. That's how we would plan those chip seal projects. And we had the equipment to do that. And, you know, hopefully that's the direction we're getting back to.
Absolutely.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Just real quick on the skid steer on that same topic, the street fund.
Mhm.
Is that the same one we're gonna be approving on item E?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Marilyn? You, man? Okay. I need, looking for action approval on resolution 22-23-22.
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Robinson, a second by Mr. Bowen. Joanne, would you read the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Bowen,
Yes.
Ms. Cordova,
Yes.
Mr. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Lucero,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
and Mr. Heflin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
All right, item D is Holtec International Railroad Nuclear Waste Transport Information. And I think we have a couple of representatives from Holtec that are here. Would you come up to the podium, sir, and introduce yourself, please? We have a couple of things that were left on our areas here. From you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Well, good evening. My name's Ed Mayer. I'm the program director for their interim storage facility that's proposed to be built in southeast New Mexico. And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I appreciate this opportunity to address you tonight. I've been with Holtec for 7 years. I have this project in southeast New Mexico. I also have a project in Spain and also one in Brazil. And before my time with Holtec, I served 28 years in the submarine force. Next slide. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to go over who Holtec is. This brief will take 20 minutes and I'll follow your lead. If there's questions that you want answered during the brief, by all means, if you'd like to wait till the end, we could do that also. But I think it's important to know who Holtec is. I'll brief you on the project and transportation and then a little bit on the timeline. So next slide. So first, who Holtec is, we were founded by our CEO, Krishna P. Singh in 1986. He had some ideas on how to store spent nuclear fuel, and that's how we got our start. We're a vertically integrated company, so we create the ideas, engineer it, manufacture, deliver, install, operate, and if necessary, at the end, decommission. You'll see there's our main business activities. You'll see that the first one is the storage of spent nuclear fuel. That's really our bread and butter. Our manufacturing centers is Orville, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Camden, New Jersey, and also there's one in Pune, India. Dr. Singh is an immigrant from India. You see, we also make heat exchangers. We're designing a small modular reactor in-house, and down at the bottom, consolidated interim storage, and that's what I'm here to speak to you today. We're the largest exporter of nuclear technologies, largest U.S. exporter of nuclear technologies, I'm sorry. And here's some of the statistics. So next slide. This is just a visual of the statistics. This is all the nuclear power plants that we support around the United States for dry storage. And these are all the countries that use our dry storage technologies. I'll point out that in Ukraine, we designed and built an interim storage facility for all their spent nuclear fuel. It was commissioned and ready to start receiving fuel, and then the war broke out. So we'll have to see what the timeline is. But we built a facility similar to this before. In Ukraine, they use an above ground technology, and we're going to use the technology in southeast New Mexico that's just below ground, and I'll get into that. So next slide. And just the baseline, the level of knowledge of what we're actually shipping. The smallest unit is right there. It's a fuel assembly. A fuel assembly is 12 foot tall. It's about a foot square, and it's made up of 100 fuel rods. Now, a fuel rod is a tube about as big as your pinky, and it's filled with pellets. They're fuel pellets, and there's a facsimile in front of you. The little black pellet, that's the size and shape of the fuel pellet. It has 5% uranium oxide, and it's made out of ceramic. And they're stacked in those long tubes, 12 feet long. And there's about 300 of them in this fuel assembly. And the fuel assembly is held together with stainless steel end caps. So a fuel assembly is stainless steel, a zircaloy tube, and ceramic. So there's no liquids. Popular culture would say it's green goo. It's not. It's stainless steel, zircaloy, and ceramic. And that's key. There's about 150 fuel assemblies in a reactor, and they fission in the reactor for about 5 years. And then they're taken out and they're stored in a pool because they generate a lot of heat, even when they're out of the reactor. They're in the pool for 1 to 3 years until it doesn't generate as much heat. Then they're taken out of the pool and they're put in what's called a multi-purpose canister, 18 feet tall, 6 feet in diameter. 37 to 89 of those fuel assemblies will go inside of that. It's 1/2 inch stainless steel, so 18 feet tall, 6 feet in diameter. Says, since they just came out of the pool, they'll have water on. And they put hot helium to dry it. And then they pressurize it with helium and they seal weld it. So that is what we'll be transporting. Stainless steel canisters, 1/2 inch thick, 18 feet tall, 6 feet diameter. Now, there are limits to the strength of stainless steel. So they're putting overpacks, the High Storm or the High Storm UMAX. And they're about 400 tons. They're made of concrete and steel. You can fly a 737 into them. You can throw a telephone pole in a tornado, throw a car into them, terrorist attack. You're not going to hurt the overpack. And that's why the stainless steel is in the overpack to protect it. So next slide. This is just on the left. That's a fuel assembly. That's about 12 feet long. It's underwater. It's in the pool. And then to the right at the top, that's our above ground technology. So that above ground top has that stainless steel cylinder inside of it. It's about 400 tons. It has to be moved with a tracked vehicle. What we propose to build in New Mexico is down the bottom. That's the below ground technology. The cylinder is just below ground level. And that has a person standing right next to the storage facility. Next slide. I get a lot of questions of why move the fuel? So let me just take 2 minutes and walk you through that. 1982 Nuclear Waste Policy Act. You all paid 1 mil per kilowatt hours to go into the nuclear waste fund. US government said, we're going to build a repository. And we're going to take all the spent nuclear fuel and take it to a repository. And it'll stay there permanently. So $12 billion was collected and $12 billion was spent when Yucca was built. But we know Yucca Mountain wasn't open. So in 1998, there was a breach of contract because the nuclear power plants, all their pools were filled. They had to take the fuel out and put it somewhere because that's what they planned to do. And that's what the government said the government was going to do. So they sued the federal government. They won. And now all nuclear power plants have dry storage, all the nuclear power plants. Because they have to put dry storage. The fuel has to go somewhere to make room in the pools. So we're paying $800 million a year as a nation. And that's out of the treasury. It's out of the judgment, it's out from lawsuits. There's still 25 billion in the nuclear waste fund. So there's money to build another repository, but it has to be sited and built, or Yucca Mountain has to be built. So when Yucca was finally stopped by President Obama, he put together a Blue Ribbon Commission for American Nuclear Future, 2012. And in that, the two major takeaways is the repository is still the national strategy. There's still going to be a repository somewhere built in the United States. But the second is that interim storage should be built to bring all the fuel together. So we as a nation don't have to pay $800 million a year to store it at all these individual sites. And that's when the Eddy Lee Energy Alliance asked for a proposal from Holtec, from NAC, the Japanese company, and from Areva, a French company. Holtec, NAC, and Areva are the three companies in dry storage. And we do have the gold standard in dry storage, so they selected our technology. So I'm quick to say that we were invited to New Mexico by New Mexicans. Holtec didn't come here and plant a flag. We were asked to submit a proposal and they selected our proposal. Next slide. So this is what I'll go through quickly. It's safe against natural man-made disasters, secure against terrorism. It's retrievable. You can lower one of the big stainless steel canisters in or take it out in an 8-hour period, and it's temporary. It complements the repository. It doesn't replace the repository. The interim storage facility, it's interim measured in decades. I'll be the first to say it's going to be 40 to 60 years, but it is interim. It's not permanent. Next slide. So how the facility works, I think it's important just to understand the safety of the facility. This is the 18-foot stainless steel canister. There's 3 foot of reinforced concrete at the bottom, 3 foot reinforced concrete at the top, flow will fill between it. And then there's a carbon steel silo. And that's what the canister is lowered into. There's also a divider shell. So the surface of this canister could be 100 or 150 degrees. It heats the air, it goes up through the center. And then air comes in, there's 4 center vents, goes down outside the divider shell. It goes in, so it's natural circulation of air. So there needs no electric, no pumps, no water, it just needs air. The lid, it's a 15-ton lid, and it's for protection. And we don't even bolt it down, it's so heavy. And again, you can fly a 737 into this, it'll withstand a terrorist attack. It's an extremely robust facility. Next slide, and I'll come back to that slide. Get a lot of questions about earthquakes because there's some fracking earthquakes. In southeast New Mexico, you hear about them in Oklahoma. So you may know the Mentone, Texas earthquake in 2020. That was 5 on the Richter scale. Richter scale is energy released at the epicenter. So we don't go by Richter scale, we go by G's because G's is the actual shaking force. The Mentone, Texas is considered a large regional earthquake for southeast New Mexico. 5 on the Richter scale, 0.05 G's, 5/100ths of a G. The facility is rated for 1.3 G's. 1.3 G's would take this facility and shake it back and forth 1 meter. So picture this building shaking back and forth 1 meter. It would destroy the building. This facility is rated for 1.3 G's and the cylinders will not breach. The 10,000-year return earthquake for New Mexico is 1/4 of a G. Our design-based earthquake is about 1/2 a G. And we're designed for 1.3 G. I go through this just so you know how robust this facility is. This facility is actually built at San Onofre in Southern California on the San Andreas Fault. It's licensed to be on the San Andreas Fault. It's that robust. Next slide. So that's the earthquake perspective. We did analysis and we showed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that natural gas explosions in the area would not affect this facility. We have to design it against terrorist threats. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has what's called a design-based threat. All federal buildings have a design-based threat. And this has it. They're compartmented or classified threats, so I can't discuss those, but we exceed the requirements to protect against those terrorist threats. Effect on the environment. A lot of questions about the radiation level. I briefed some ranchers, 18 ranchers from Eddy County a couple of weeks ago. The radiation level at the outer security fence, if the facility is totally built out with the hottest fuel, is 0.07 millirem an hour. So to put that in, to couch that, if you stood at the outer security fence for 4 days, say 100 hours, that's 7 millirem. We all receive 300 to 350 millirem a year from the sun. You get 0.5 millirem an hour flying in a plane. So I got 2 millirem coming here. I'll get 2 millirem on the way back home. So you'll get 7 millirem if you stand at the outer security fence for 4 days straight, which we wouldn't allow you to do because would be a security issue. It just shows you how low the radiation level is. And from an economic perspective, you can frack right under the facility. We know that $5.4 billion went into New Mexico's general fund from oil and gas, and we wouldn't affect that. The NRC is sensitive to the economic impacts. And you can do a vertical well and then horizontally frack under the facility will have no effect on the facility. The shallowest formation is about 3,000 feet against formation. Next slide. And I'll go through these quick. That's being built, excavate 25 feet, and that's the base mat and the silos. Next slide. Filling it up with flowable fill. Next slide. Next slide. Rebar for the top mat. Next slide. And this is Callaway, Missouri. Callaway, Missouri is the other place that through a group of New Mexico legislators out there. And you could climb on top of the lids. You can almost feel some heat come out, but you can feel a little bit of heat coming out. The radiation level is so low that you can actually, like I said, you can stand on the lid, you can walk around it, and it's not a concern. Next slide. It's just the artist's conception. You'll see that is serviced by rail. Everything will come in by rail, and the second half of my brief, I'll cover that. But it will have a security building, admin, a cash transfer building, 2 fences, motion detectors. So it comes in by rail, take the canister out, and then it will move with a heavy lift vehicle and stored at the facility. Next slide. So this is just a bird's eye view. The black line that's horizontal is a 4-mile rail spur that we're going to build. That's Hobbs Highway, Laguna Plata up in the middle. That's Intrepid North, and then Laguna Gatuna to the right. So again, everything would be coming in by rail, and we're going to build that rail spur. Next slide. You don't hear a lot about transporting spent nuclear fuel because it routinely occurs. There are laws on the books. It's regulated by the DOT and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And as a nation, we've been moving spent nuclear fuel for 60 years. There's been over 2,500 shipments of civilian nuclear fuel, over 800 shipments of new nuclear fuel, all done without an accident and without a release. So our nation has a history of safe and secure transportation, but you just don't hear about it. So a lot of times when you hear about transporting spent nuclear fuel, we all think it's something new. It's not. There's a tried and true process to it. We have a cask that is licensed. It's the High Star 190. Next slide. I'll go over that in the next slide, but this is how it's going to be transported. It's a unit train. It's only going to be spent nuclear fuel. This only shows 1 cask. We think there'll be 10 casks on the train, 2 trains a month. So 10 casks a train, 2 trains a month. Has 2 engines for redundancy, a rail escort vehicle, armed and trained guards. And also on the rail escort vehicle, it will monitor critical attributes of the train to see if there's going to be an impending failure. And all of that will be monitored on board and also back in an operations center. The operations center will be stood up when the fuel's in shipment. Next slide. A little bit about the cask. Inside here, this is that 18-foot cylinder and 6-foot diameter, and then it's the outer transportation cask. There's impact limiters on each side. So like crumple zones on your car, if there is an accident, it absorbs energy and it stops it. The backbone of that dark blue cylinder is about 6 inches of carbon steel. And then there's 3 inches of lead and 6 inches of a polymer. That gives it a little backbone, but mostly the backbone is the 6 inches of carbon steel. The NRC has shown that if you take one of these transportation casks, you take it 120 miles an hour into an immovable object, granite, concrete, steel, immovable object, it will not breach. On the face, on the corner, or the side, 120 miles an hour will not breach. These are incredibly robust. You could suspend this above a pool of 30,000 gallons of petroleum. And that's the volume of a rail car. And you can burn it and it will not breach. So these are incredibly robust transportation casks. Next slide. We always get the question, are they too heavy for the rail? So it's just easy enough to show you the numbers. The total package is 337 tons, but it's a 12-axle rail car, so it's 28 tons per axle. Dash 9, it's about 210 tons, depending on the variant, but it only has 6 axles. So that's 35 tons per axle. So you'll see that the locomotive puts more weight on the track than the package. And Cooper E80, 80,000 pounds per axle, 40 tons per axle. So you'll see that the engine or the locomotive is closer to the limit of the rail, which is a typical commercial rail, than the package. Next slide. We have to prove that the transportation cask will pass 4 tests. A free drop 30 feet. Then you pick it up again, drop it 4 feet on a spike. Burn it for 30 minutes at about 1450 degrees and then quench it. You can see that could be like a rail accident. And it has to pass all those tests without breaching. We sold one of our transportation casks to the Swiss. And the Swiss said, we understand the high standards the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has, but we want you to prove to us that if an F-16 flies into the side of the transportation cask. The cask will not breach. The outer cask, not the center stainless steel. You still have that. That's seal welded. Outer cask will not breach. So rather than doing a full scale test that's complex, we did a quarter scale test, and that's an exact quarter scale model. Next slide. Yeah, play it, please. And we took it the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and we flew 1,000-pound missile 600 miles an hour into the side of the cask. And it didn't breach. There was no damage. One thing to note is that this is the High Star 180. The High Star 180 take a 15-foot canister. The High Star 190 can take a 15-foot 10-inch canister. The difference is the one we tested only had 2.5 inches of structural steel. The High Star 190 has almost 6 inches of structural steel. So it's twice as strong as the High Star 190. So again, it's hard to overstate how strong these transportation casks are, and it's for a reason. Next slide. Whoop, one more. There we go. Okay, this is just a timeline. So for a license, there's two deliverables. There's an environmental impact statement and a safety evaluation report. Finally, the environmental impact statement follows the NEPA process. I'll note that at the request of the governor, that the New Mexico Environmental Department was a coordinating agency for EIS, and also the Bureau of Land Management, because there's a lot of BLM land down there. And we have the final EIS was issued in July. You're going to see a report coming out later this month for 2 additional sets of questions that weren't recognized in the EIS. It didn't affect the EIS, but in the public comment period, it was pointed out that there were 2 sets of questions that were missed, and in fact they were. So you'll see a report coming out. But the final EIS was signed out, and it recommended a license based on a positive safety evaluation report. The safety evaluation report we expect this January. So after the safety evaluation report and then having the EIS, we're allowed to get a license. And we expect that in February. That third branch is adjudicatory. If anybody in the general public believes that either our EIS or the safety evaluation report does not meet federal law, and there were all the public meetings that we had in Roswell, Hobbs, Carlsbad, Albuquerque. If they think it didn't meet law, they could file what's called a contention. And there were over 50 contentions filed. And they went to 3 federal judges, Atomic Safety Licensing Board. And if they had merit, then they would turn into lawsuits. Then it just goes to path of a lawsuit. But the 3 federal judges actually kicked them all out, for lack of a better lawyer, but they disapproved the contentions. So no contentions were accepted to lawsuits. There were 3 or 4 that are appealed, and now they're at the DC appeals court, but the court's not going to look at those unless we get a license, because I think there's just not going to be some time. If we get a license in February, then you'll probably see in the paper that the DC appeals court is looking at some contentions. So next slide. This is the last slide. I covered the first 3. I always say that the prime directive is to understand that the facility and transportation is safe and secure. And I'll do my best to educate you so you understand that. If we get past the prime directive, then we can talk about the economic benefits. You see 1 bullet on the last slide, and I'll put it down. If the facility is built out totally, it's a $3 billion capital investment. If we only do phase 1, which is for 500 cylinders, we'll call them, it's a $130 million capital investment. There's going to be 100 operations jobs. We believe about 100 construction jobs that are long-term because it may be built in phases. And there'll be a manufacturing facility. Those big silos that you saw and the divider shells and the lids, we make those now in Pittsburgh and Camden, but then we'd have to ship them down. So somewhere in southeast New Mexico, and Dr. Singh's dedicated to do this, somewhere we're going to build a Holtec manufacturing facility, and it's going to have 200 jobs, and there are 200 workers that are cutters, benders, and welders. And then there'll be above that is inspectors and the administrative staff. And again, somewhere on a rail line, somewhere in southeast New Mexico. And we do have a revenue sharing agreement with the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance. It's a public entity. We have elected officials of Eddie Lee, Carl Bed and Hobbs. And we're going to share 30% of the gross revenue. Is 15 to 25 million for phase one. And then a third of that, Lee Estates, that will go to the state. That's between them and the state. So again, I appreciate this opportunity. I know I went through very quick. So subject to questions, I think there's.
Thanks, Ed. Does anybody have any question for Mr. Mayor?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
How about, have you had any derailment when you're doing all this stuff?
As a nation, there hasn't been any accidents shipping spent nuclear fuel, and there's been no releases. So no.
Mayor, if I may. You had said that the 1.3 Gs is what you're rated for, or is
Yes.
you're going to design for? What is that on the Richter scale?
See, Richter scale is energy at the epicenter. So at the, you could have a high energy at the epicenter if it's deep in the earth, or if it's sand. You're not going to get that shaking motion. I will tell you that 1.3 Gs is the highest level of USGS earthquake. There's 10 levels. It's not in Richter scale because it doesn't just translate directly. But USGS has 10 levels of earthquakes. And I think the cutoff is greater than 1.24 Gs is level 10. That's a level 10 earthquake. And there's never been a level 10 earthquake in CONUS, continental United States. There was one in 2008, I think a follow-up in 2010 in Christchurch, New Zealand. That's a really fire volcanic activity. But that's where you have to go to get an earthquake that size. But it doesn't translate directly, sir, to.
Okay. One more question.
Sir.
I guess the obvious question for me is, why are we having this, is this because you're in the area? Just a requirement, or just educating the people in the southeast New Mexico? And how did you come to that site, Southwest Lee County?
I appreciate the question because I didn't go over that. The Eddie Lee Energy Alliance bought a piece of property under Bush Jr. They had we had as a nation, the Global Nuclear Energy Partnership. And it was a program that, because Bush Jr. wanted to have reinvigorate nuclear power in the country. So under GNEP, Aaliyah bought this piece of property in Lee County and had it characterized. So they did borings and they did everything to characterize it for nuclear technologies, whether it's going to be a reactor or some type of nuclear facility. So they already knew that this was a good place for a nuclear facility. So that's where it started, GNEP. But after, when Bush left office, GNEP went away. And they had this piece of property that was already characterized for a nuclear reactor or a nuclear technology. So when the Blue Ribbon Commission put their report out in 2012, and said an interim storage facility is an interim solution for the nation, it's a nuclear facility. Aaliyah said, hey, we could put that right here because we already have this area characterized for a nuclear facility. So that's why they put the proposal out to NAC, Ariza, and Holtec. So that's how we got there.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one comment I'd like to have you modify in your presentation,
Yes, sir.
if you would.
I will.
Fracking does not cause seismic activity. Produced water disposal is what does that. So
Okay.
we have to fight that fracking issue a lot. So I'd appreciate that. And I think you can do the research and see that that's what we've come up with. And we're coming up with regulations for produced water disposal and to formations that won't change pressures and hopefully not cause those.
Yes, sir. And I,
Thank you.
I have one question there.
Go ahead.
Will we see any of these rail cars come through the Sea of Portales? Will y'all be using this line or will it be more further south?
I mean, I don't know how many lines, but it will be coming from Clovis to Carlsbad and then to the facility. So you will.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's my question.
That's where that line runs.
Yeah, from Carlsbad to Roswell, yeah.
Yes.
Would you be upgrading the tracks if you have to go through here?
Properly maintained commercial grade rail meets the specifications to store this. Now, the rail routes are approved by the Department of Transportation, FRA, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So right now, we don't have the rail routes established because we don't have a license, and because we don't have a license, there's no utilities that would really, we're not going to negotiate anything with us now because we don't even know if we're going to get a license, and if we do, we don't know if we're going to build it. But once we get a license, and then we know what utilities may want to ship their fuel here, then the rail line will be determined, whether it be from Pilgrim or Vermont Yankee or Oyster Creek in New Jersey or Songs. And then that will be determined. And then the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the FRA will have to approve it. And if there are upgrades that are required, they'll be done.
One of the upgrades we'd be looking at, Jake, I think, you and I discussed this a little bit earlier, or some of the, rail crossings or the road crossings in Portales. We've got 2 or 3 that aren't protected at all, other than just flashing lights. We don't have the arm bars and everything, so. And I'm sure your company wouldn't want to be running those through here, but again, that would be something in the future that when they improve that rail line that.
Yes, and that's part of the approval. Yes,
Yes,
yes, sir.
that's right.
Sir.
Anything else for Ed? All right, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Being here.
Thank
you. Thank you.
For the-
Thank you.
Discussion. All right, item E, hey, we're back to the skid steer Bobcat. Travis. Got pictures?
No.
Council Mayor, we bring a request for a purchase of a skid steer on a cooperative purchasing agreement. Staff is requesting approval to purchase a new skid steer, also known as a Bobcat, for the primary use in the Public Infrastructure Department. And a schedule allows for other department needs within the city on a cooperative education services agreement. Number 2022-10 C 104 AIL. Pending CES review and approval. Purchase price for the new skid is approximately $65,220. We will be available for delivery in spring of 2023. Portion of the American Recovery Act funds has been appropriated for the purchase of street equipment, and this piece of equipment is necessary to continue many needs of the city for street repairs, water department cuts, parks needs, and that is just to name a few of the things that this equipment can be utilized for.
Thanks, Steve. I have a question that's just, is it on track or the wheels?
Wills,
Get more use out of that, can't you?
yeah, you can.
Any
Less
questions
damage
for
too.
Mr. Travis?
Mayor, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Miller to approve, second by Mr. Robinson. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Right, item F is the ratification execution grant for the New Mexico DOT Traffic Safety Division. Chris sitting here.
Deputy Chief Sanford is.
Tony, you taking it?
This ought to be good.
You got pictures?
It's awesome, sir.
That's okay.
I got one of this one.
Okay.
Mayor, City Council, what we're requesting is the ratification of execution of the grant agreement with the New Mexico DOT Traffic Safety Division under federal and state traffic safety regulations. The consolidation agreement provides funding for the Portales Police Department to conduct the following projects and activities as shown below. It'd be the ENDWI, the buckle up and step. DWI would consist of checkpoints and saturation patrol. The buckle up would be overtime for law enforcement agencies to conduct safety belt and child restraint. And then the step provides funding for a sustained enforcement program that target traffic problems such as speeding, DWI, road rage, distraction and reckless driving, fatigue, drowsy driving.
This is an annual grant. We have to apply for this every year though. don't we?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Apply for it.
Yes, sir.
Pretty familiar. Any questions from the council?
Mayor, was this the one that we used to be a pass through to the county?
I don't think
No.
so.
That was,
There's a-
that was the WI council.
Okay.
You do your
I
own
knew there was some
grant.
kind of
Yeah.
pass through. Okay.
County does their own check.
How many,
Starting
how
in-
many like the ENDWIs will you perform throughout the year? Like the checkpoints do, is there 4 a year, 1 a quarter
If I
for the
remember,
DWI checkpoints?
that's a question. If I remember correctly, we usually do 4 to 6 a year.
Any other questions? Tony? Entertain action to approve the
Take a motion to approve, Mr.
Second.
motion by Mr. Bowen to approve, second by Mr. Lopez. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Resolution.
Oh, well,
Say again.
It's a resolution, is it not? No, it's not. I'm sorry. That was,
Ratification.
yes, sir.
Yeah. That R word tricked you. Thanks, Joe.
Good, Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Tony.
Item G is ratification of signature change order for closeout on the Portales taxiway. Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor Council. I'm gonna make you guys happy. I'm not doing a change order for more money. I'm doing a change order for less money. So we finished the taxiway project. The architects and engineers, they underran by 17 pounds for our crack seal. So the council approved $121,532.43 through council, but it was actually, when they put it all together, $82.76 less than that. So we signed the change order due to time, but we'd like to get ratification on that signature to only pay $121,449.67.
Every little bit counts. Questions for Kelly? Entertain actions. Change order.
motion to approve.
Second.
Ms. Cordova, second by Ms. Parker. All in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thanks, Kelly. All right, item H is public input for which no action will be taken, any matter not known about or which could not have reasonably been foreseen prior to the time of the posting of the agenda. This agenda item is for informational purposes only. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker, limited to 1 presentation per meeting, and no more than 6 speakers on each subject. Councilors will not respond to comments or answer questions to avoid a violation of Open Meetings Act. Questions or requests for information should be directed to the city manager in writing during regular business hours. That'll be in red and said. Are there anybody who wants to speak to the council? Randy, go ahead. Introduce yourself, sir, for the minute.
Yes. I'm Randy Dunson. I'm the commander of the American Legion here. I'd like to make some comments about the memorial building. I believe that since it was constructed in 1982, somewhere thereabouts, every year except for during COVID, we've had a Veterans Day program in a large meeting room here. And I understand what's going on this year, and Sarah, thank you so much for working with me, that if it doesn't work out here, we can do the room, but I'm concerned that in the future, we're not going to be able to use that room. I hope I'm wrong, but a little bit about this building, and I'll be as very brief, I promise, but from what I gather, and this is kind of oral history, so I don't know. I hope some of you know more about this than I do, but the original Memorial Building was built around 1958. The American Legion brought in some kind of a movie star, and they had some kind of performance, and that was the seed money. Because it was for the veterans, the community kicked in the money and built the original building, and it burned. The American Legion also had a building and it burned. So they combined the two insurance monies and built this building with the idea that it would be available for use by the veterans and by the public for certain things. And I'm sure that the community kicked in because we had so many guys that lost in World War II, 95. And a lot of them were in the Bataan Death March. So I've talked to Tommy Kent. He's the only one left on the city council that's still living, besides Don Schaefer, and Don's kind of in and out. But anyhow, from the beginning, the city agreed to pay the utilities, the insurance, and the upkeep, and it was thought that by renting it out that it would pay for itself. Obviously, it didn't. And we appreciate that the city needs to use the building. I mean, we just use the room one night a month. We understand that, but still, I'm concerned that this building still be available for the purpose that it was intended. It's for use by veterans and the community. That's what the veterans wanted and the people wanted. So that's my concern. I hope it's a baseless concern, but thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else from the audience? Logan? You can pass them out after.
Mayor and City Council, thank you for taking the time to hear me out. So my name is Logan Brown, and I know most of you guys. And so I just want to start by explaining kind of a little bit about what Clovis and Hobbs are currently doing and why we should care and why we should also take a similar action as well. So I'll be speaking on the issue of the Sanctuary City for the Unborn initiative, the Clovis and Hobbs, and I know a lot of you guys are very familiar with that issue, the details. I want to kind of, and I just want to be clear from the beginning, I am not directly affiliated with any of them, so I don't speak for them, so I don't want to, overstep any bounds or anything, but I want to explain my role in some of this. So before I get there, I do want to mention that we as a community support life. We support life of women and children inside and outside the womb. And as evidence of that, there's this Thursday, the annual banquet for the PRC. There will be over 600 people packed out in attendance, putting their money where their mouths are on this issue. So that's just a little side note. So the ordinance, the reason you don't have it in your hands and the reason it's not on this agenda right now is because it is literally being written up as we speak, because it has to be written for each city that we get this proposed in. Clovis already has, Clovis and Hobbs, Clovis last Thursday in special session, Hobbs just yesterday in regular session, they did pass to introduce it to publication. And ideally, we would like to get this on the next agenda for November 1st for Portales. Why should we have this ordinance? And what is the purpose of this ordinance? So the purpose of this ordinance is to prevent an abortion facility from opening up shop in Portales, Clovis, Hobbs, any of these parts of the state. The way the ordinance works, and it will be published in the newspaper tomorrow, the Clovis version of the ordinance, and they're all very similar, so they're not super precise, and I'll be quick because I know I'm running out of time. But read the ordinance. I have a 10-minute video of the Hobbs City Council attorney that actually presents the ordinance and kind of walks people through it in a very systematic way. So the reason that this is a pertinent issue, an urgent issue, is because the abortion mills that were shut down in Texas are moving here, and they have specified 3 cities in particular that they're moving to: Hobbs, Clovis, and Las Cruces. And so they are focusing on those 3 cities, and they're looking for a border town, and we're the next largest border town next to Texas. I personally invited Mark Dixon. He and Jonathan Mitchell, I never have enough time on these. They will defend this ordinance pro bono. They have lawyers on their side. So I would love to give more details, but obviously for lack of time. So it will be on the agenda for next week. Thank you for hearing me out. Yes, sir.
Yes. thank you.
Thanks, Logan. Anybody else in the community? Yes, ma'am. Deep already.
I wasn't planning on saying anything tonight. I really wasn't. But just really quickly, Right to Life is fully in support of what's being pursued here. I'm sure that you're not too surprised about that. But actually, the reason I wanted to stand up was because if I knew anybody's text phones, I would have asked you, please ask this question of Holtec. I grew up in Carlsbad and I was young, but I do remember the fear and the fight that went on to bring in the waste isolation pilot plant into Carlsbad many years ago. And we were assured that there would never be a radiation leak. Everything that we were concerned about didn't need to be concerned about. It was planted deep within our salt beds, yada, yada. Less than 10 years ago, a breach happened and radiation did get out from beneath and did get above ground, and they had to clear out the waste isolation pilot plant, check people out. A dear friend of mine's mom was very concerned about it because she worked out there. So I was just curious. We heard the same assurances. Now that was built many years ago, and I'm positive that their technology has come a long way since then. But we heard the same assurances. And so I was just curious, how can they assure even better that these will not happen anymore? So just a question I wanted to ask and to put before the city council on something like that. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything from the council? Anything from staff? Okay. Right, nothing else there. Item I is an executive session, a closed meeting. I would entertain action to convene into a closed meeting to discuss matters as provided for under the New Mexico statutes pertaining to open meetings for related to the purchase, acquisition, and disposal of real property or water rights.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Heflin, second by Ms. Parker. Joanne, would you read the roll?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Bowen,
Yes.
Ms. Cordova,
Yes.
Mr. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Lucero,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Heflin.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna go into a closed session. I'll entertain action to convene into open session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Heflin, a second by Ms. Cordova. Do we need a roll call there or just vote?
No.
Everybody, all in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are in an open session. Item 3 is action as a result of the closed session. Mr. Miller.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion that we authorize the mayor to sign the appropriate documents to close on the sale of the property with the Phillips for the cemetery expansion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Joanne, let's have a roll call on this.
Okay, who was the second?
I was.
Heflin, I'm sorry. Mike made the motion and Chad made the second.
Okay, Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Bowen,
Yes.
Ms. Cordova,
Yes.
Mr. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Lucero,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Heflin.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's good news and a long time coming.
Yes.
No kidding.
Anyway,
Good job, Steve, on that.
all right. Next item is
Thank you.
adjournment.